In a world where the American dollar is the global reserve currency, with the majority of global trade conducted in the greenbacks, it's rare to hear of a currency thrashing the US dollar. But did the Taliban just pull off a miracle that Russia could only dream of? In a shocking turn of events, the world's third best performing currency in the third quarter of 2023 is, drumroll please, the Taliban's afghani currency. Currently, the afghani has jumped 9% against the US dollar, which shot it to the very top of the world's best performing currency. But are things really as they seem? Is the US dollar going to go the way of the ruble and all your future Blizzard game purchases be immediately refunded to you in afghanis because Blizzard is a terrible game developer? The situation requires some nuance because the afghani beating the US dollar is sort of like Dogecoin beating Bitcoin in performance. It doesn't mean that Dogecoin is worth the electricity it takes to check your balance, it just means that Doge Daddy Elon probably sent out another tweet. Sorry, Zeet and Musk stans bought more Doge. Or at least they would if Twitter, X, wasn't a dead platform. Bitcoin still beats the pants out of Doge, but the useless coin temporarily performed better. But the afghani is currently performing quite well, and that's good news for the people of Afghanistan no matter how you feel about the Taliban or the US pullout. What's probably even more interesting is that neither the euro nor the dollar are in the top two spots ahead of the afghani. It's the Colombian peso and the Sri Lankan rupee. In 2022, the US dollar beat out every other global currency, gaining value even as other currencies plummeted, due in no small part to Vladimir Putin's attempt to defeat Russia by invading Ukraine. And while the dollar hasn't slowed, other currencies have performed a lot better this year. The dollar continues to gain in strength thanks to the Fed's ongoing fight against inflation. While the dollar has gained 0.04% since March 2023, the afghani has surged a whopping 14%, and it's due to some pretty tight economic policies imposed by the Taliban. Immediately upon retaking power in 2021, the Taliban imposed currency control that barred anyone from using the dollar or the Pakistani rupee, both of which had flooded Afghanistan and largely displaced the local currency. Online trading was also banned, and this is commonly done in dollars over various online marketplaces, so bad news for any Afghanistan Amazon Prime subscribers. But the Taliban efforts to prop up the afghani are coming with some serious side effects. For starters, deflation has rocked Afghanistan hard, with a 9% annual decrease in prices since the Taliban took over. That might sound like great news. Who doesn't love lower prices? And surely anyone who's sick of paying $20 for 2 apples and a pack of discount steaks at the grocery store would love to see some deflation right about now. But while deflation does increase consumer purchasing power, it comes with some pretty significant side effects that can all too quickly spin out of control. Moderate drops in prices can actually be a good thing for an economy, as it actually encourages people to spend more. When the cost of food and energy is high, people are likely to hoard their money, which is bad for the economy. But when prices fall, the taps turn on. Deflation, making currency stronger, can also encourage saving, which is different than hoarding, and thus makes a population more economically healthy. In this case, deflation can be positive and actually lead to economic growth before self-correcting. But rapid deflation is a serious cause for concern, and with a 9% deflation 2 years running, Afghanistan is looking at a significantly troubled future. While healthy deflation can be caused by technological breakthroughs, making goods and services cheaper and more abundant, unhealthy deflation can be triggered by an economy heavily laden with debt, suddenly having a great deal of credit pulled away. This is what's happening in Afghanistan, and the prognosis is not good. After the Taliban took over, the nation suffered a massive cut in foreign aid. Prior to the takeover, a whopping 43% of Afghanistan's GDP came from foreign aid. 75% of all public spending was financed via foreign aid. 90% of the country's population lived on less than $2 a day, and half the nation needed humanitarian aid. However, in order to prevent directly funding the Taliban, the rest of the world immediately froze Afghani assets and cut off this rich tap of badly needed funding. The US and Taliban met together to discuss turning the money tap back on, but neither side could agree to a deal. After the Taliban takeover, the US froze billions of US dollars in Afghani foreign reserves held in the US. This money would normally be used to purchase goods and services on the international market. This is similar to the freezing of Russian assets abroad. With Russia losing access to an estimated over $100 billion, it would normally have used to conduct trade globally and fund its military. The European Union also suspended badly needed funding to develop Afghanistan's infrastructure, which was directly supporting the buildup of schools, hospitals, police stations, and even propping up Afghanistan's farming sector. Germany and Finland also blocked development aid, though together with the EU would allow some humanitarian aid to continue, albeit under tight supervision. The last thing the world wanted was the Taliban simply using these funds to enrich themselves. Months after the takeover, the World Bank froze $400 million in funds, citing a, quote, lack of clarity within the international community regarding recognition of a government in Afghanistan. It also cut the nation off from aid money it had been receiving for years. This wasn't all a heartless move to punish Afghanistan, though. The world simply wanted to wait and see how the Taliban would shape up and what kind of government it would establish. The U.S. continued meetings and talks with the Taliban on ways of delivering aid directly to the Afghani people while bypassing the Taliban altogether, something that unsurprisingly the Taliban was not too keen on. Calls to inject liquidity into the Afghan economy to keep it afloat rang out, but the problem was nobody quite knew what to do without running the risk of directly funding the Taliban. The freezing of foreign assets not only made it difficult for normal Afghanis to access their own cash, but only left the Taliban with access to an estimated 0.01% to 0.02% of the nation's total international reserves. Before you launch a comment crusade blaming the heartless international community, the Taliban is largely to blame here. There have been global sanctions against the Taliban even before the US-led invasion kicked them out of power, and despite being explicitly warned about the consequences, the Taliban still put numerous sanctioned individuals into high-ranking government posts. As observed internationally, the Taliban basically made its own bed and now had to lie in it. Yet despite this, special licenses were provided by the U.S. Treasury to allow numerous aid groups to disperse humanitarian aid supplies, such as food and medicine, or services vital to meeting basic human needs for Afghani citizens. The transfer of badly needed development funds or business investments, however, was forbidden, crippling the Afghani economy's ability to grow. Despite this, the U.S. pledged $64 million in aid to the nation, all in the form of either direct goods or services. The EU would also rise to the occasion and pledge $1.16 billion in humanitarian aid, also to be delivered as targeted support in order to keep money out of the Taliban's hands. This aid has been absolutely critical for keeping Afghanistan out of a total collapse and meeting the needs of people rocked by a series of droughts, earthquakes, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Ironically, while the Taliban may hate the West, it's entirely dependent upon them to keep a hold on the reins of power in Afghanistan. Without aid from the West, the nation would utterly collapse and the Taliban would have its hands full trying to hold on to power in the wake of millions of angry citizens. The Taliban's been promised that if it stuck to its promises to ensure the well-being of ethnic and religious minorities and protect the rights of women, it would regain access to badly needed development funds. However, this has naturally not been the case. Despite stringent promises that it wouldn't change women's access to education, the Taliban quickly announced that it would bar all women from accessing secondary education. The UN Security Council, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and nearly the entire G7 and G20 condemned the move, but the Taliban gonna Taliban. Women are also barred from holding any government position, as well as from holding any senior positions in civil service. But things quickly went downhill from there, because the Taliban wasn't content with keeping women out of education, government, and even civil service, but really it just wanted to keep them from going anywhere. Women were banned from traveling or leaving their homes without a male family member, and were quickly shut out of working most jobs. Further, whenever a woman did step out of her home, her face must be covered at all times, and this extended to female TV newscasters, which were frankly shocked to discover the Taliban continued to allow. After years of living under significantly improved freedoms, thanks to the presence of U.S. forces and a U.S.-backed government, women naturally didn't take all this very well, and many took to the streets in protest. This resulted in the Taliban violently cracking down with public beatings, detention, torture, and even the arrest of unrelated family members, promising that men would be punished alongside their women. This is naturally just the tip of the Taliban iceberg, as the new government very quickly got to work on the old business of killing anyone they didn't like. Taliban forces undertook a massive campaign of revenge killing, seeking out and murdering anyone who had collaborated with the U.S. forces or U.S.-backed government. Many of these killings were claimed to be executions of Islamic State Khorasan Province, or ISIS-K, an internationally recognized terror group, and yet there exists no way of verifying these claims, with the Taliban likely using ISIS-K as a handy excuse to carry out a purge of its enemies. In what could only be described as a military campaign, the Taliban carried out killings all across the country. Residents in the town of Nangarhar discovered a mass grave with 45 bodies, most of which bore the signs of torture or brutal execution. Many of the bodies had missing limbs, ropes around their neck, or had been beheaded, but the Taliban also targeted groups that had fought against them in the past, often with U.S. support. targeting entire communities they claimed had supported organizations like the National Resistance Front. Detentions and killings became commonplace. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the Taliban immediately ended any freedom of speech and media that the Afghani people had once enjoyed. Hundreds of media outlets were shut down by the Taliban, and an estimated 80% of women journalists were either forced out of their jobs or chose to leave them. The nation fell under a blanket of censorship with strict adherence to fundamentalist Islamic values. Leading the charge against freedom of speech and of the press was the Taliban's Directorate of Intelligence, an ironic name if there ever existed one. This organization carried out a campaign of threats, violence, and intimidation against members of the media. They were also responsible for the killing of numerous journalists who shared anti-Taliban views after the takeover. The broadcasting of international news outlets such as the BBC and Voice of America was banned, and numerous websites were shut down. The Taliban seemed to take particular pleasure in targeting anyone covering women's rights protests. The TDI also enforced blanket mandates on what could or could not be reported, with journalists detained, beaten, or killed for reporting on anything considered anti-Taliban or harmful to the health of the nation. Blanket bans on reporting on rising food prices, the campaign of arbitrary detention, and similar subjects were quickly issued and brutally enforced. In the face of all this, the international order has refused to resume supplying badly needed development and humanitarian aid funds. While the people of Afghanistan suffer for its decision, it's ultimately the Taliban's choice. Should the current government reverse course, the world has shown a willingness to re-engage and bring badly needed aid back into a country which was once one of the most thriving in the region. Now go watch what actually went wrong in Afghanistan, or click this other video instead.